Hey, everybody. Welcome to the check-in, where a couple of friends check in over their lunch breaks to see how they're doing living under rising authoritarianism. I was just telling Danielle before we went live that there's like a siren test going on outside, which is very funny considering, everything's an emergency now. But all of this aside, how are you, my friend?
I am good. We were just talking before we hit live about, what it feels like when you're in the midst of doing something that like your spirit says that you should be doing. And it's like this moment where you click and you're just like, oh, I'm living in that moment. Like this is exactly where I want to be and what I want to be doing. And so I was just writing on, my balcony. It's beautiful outside and it's quiet. And when I write, I turn my phone on don't disturb and like there's no dings, there's no interruptions, there's no headlines coming through. And I just sat there and I was just like, oh, this is what I'm supposed to be doing. Like this is what my spirit wants. Like quiet and thoughtfulness. And I think that what has happened for me in this crumbling empire is that there's no more space for quiet and thoughtfulness because you're being forced to react all the time. And that is just like incredibly draining. So I'm finding myself in this moment of like nourishment where I'm like, oh, and then I'm going to pause from this and I get to talk to you, and check in and see like how you're doing and how you're feeling. But yeah. So how are you, my friend?
Well, I first of all, it's always nice to do this. Like, it has become one of the big highlights of my week and life at this point. Like, it's so nice, especially like as we're dealing with all of this. What you're talking about, and I just feel like I said it to you before we started, like a tuning fork, right? There's like a thing that when it rings, it feels true. And there's something I think that is going on with that, which is I've explained it in the past. It's like turning a dial on a radio, right? And trying to bring in a station that is clear in order to hear what it
Yep.
is. And
Yep.
the problem, to build off of one of the things that we've been talking about, because what are we doing here? We're scaffolding, right? We're
Hmm.
talking about the experience and what all these things are and how to get out of it and build something better. Like, so many people don't want to hear that radio station. You know what I mean? Like, they really don't want it, because when you are listening to
Hmm.
self sometimes has messages that are not comfortable,
Yep.
such as you're doing things right now that aren't healthy, they're not fulfilling. And so what do? We try and scramble that however we can, whether or not that's like, using substances, shopping, being
Yep.
vicious, trying to hoard power and influence and all these things. And there's also another question that comes along with it, which is you're talking about putting together a project, and you and I, and it's actually quite funny, we're both putting together projects right now that are basically an extension of what we're talking about here.
Yes.
And, when you're doing that, there are other problems with it, which it's like, it's kind of addictive when that tuning fork sounds good. And when you tune in that radio station, you're like, no, this is what I should be doing. But then you also have to keep in mind, like, am I doing this for the right reasons? Am
Hmm.
I doing this in order to help people? Am I doing this in order to, sort of resonate with myself? Or because I live in a capitalist society, am I doing this because of financial reward?
Right.
Building platforms or building influence or gaining something? Am I doing this from ambition? And there's this weird back and forth that happens with it where when you nail it, you nail it. And it's
Hmm.
sort of like being in the zone. Some people think about that with sports, like someone's able to like hit a bunch of shots in a row or, like have a bunch of achievements on the field. And it's sort of like you're trying to get into this sweet spot of doing the thing that is good for you, that's doing the thing that's good for other people, and doing it for the right reasons. And going back to one of the things we keep talking about, that's complicated. That takes
Yep.
a lot of work, and it takes a lot of energy that a lot of people aren't willing to expend. And quite frankly, it wears you out sometimes if you're not careful, and you can overdo it. So it's a little bit of a dance, but man, does it make myself ring out hearing that you're feeling that, because like those are the moments that we live for, right?
And I think that that's it. I think that one of the things about living under this kind of autocracy, authoritarianism, all of the names that we use, is that it zaps you from your ability to thrive
Yep.
because you're just so focused on surviving. And there is something, obviously, we know that there are people who have never had an opportunity to thrive, have
Yep.
always been placed in the position of just surviving. And I think that in this particular moment, that to me, going after this audacious goal of wanting to thrive is part of my resistance.
Yep.
And there are times when I feel really guilty, right? Like I'm sitting outside, taking in the sunshine with my laptop, listening to birds when I read a story this morning of, yet another person that was detained on the streets of New York City and they're here on holiday, right? And, another mother that had been working in this small rural town for 20 years and the entire town voted for Trump, not realizing that they were voting against this woman that they love. That's in the New York Times right now, right? And now she's talking to her children through video chat. So there are moments then when I'm in that, when the tuning fork, as you say, Jared, is like just humming, and then a bit of guilt seeps in. Why should I be experiencing the humming and the alignment while others are incarcerated underground, living in fear, right? And so there is also that kind of push pull of using and trying to strive for that tuning fork place while also recognizing that too many people have never been there and so many more will be robbed of that opportunity.
You know what I'm reminded of in that moment of what you're laying out? I'm reminded of the videos and the scenes that we saw coming out of San Diego last week, where ICE and whoever in the hell is doing all this, right?
Yeah.
Like, I mean, like, quite frankly, the fascist paramilitary groups, whatever, they roll into San Diego, right? And they start trying to round up people at a worksite raid. And where are the people who resisted this, who got smoke thrown at them, who got smoke bombs, who got, undoubtedly pepper spray, on top of that, flashbangs just absolutely hurled at them in this like fascistic operation? Where were they? They were in like a really nice local fancy restaurant. And we all know those restaurants, and I've been in that area. Like, I've been like, what is one of my favorite things? It's like going into a restaurant like during like the spring or early summer. They have those doors that come up. You know
Yep.
what I mean?
Yep.
How good is that? It feels so good. It's such a luxury to sit there in the open air, to have a drink, have some food. And what happened? When these fascists rolled up in order to carry out this operation, the people didn't stay in the restaurant. They didn't hang out, they didn't have their drinks, they didn't have their appetizers. They saw people who were in danger and who were being put, in the roving, brutal eye of fascism, and they walked out of the restaurant and they stepped up, right? Which is the difference. And I think being aware of like not just privilege, but also
Yeah.
what it is that we experience in our lives. That, and you want to talk about tuning fork, like doing a project or putting together a project that feels right for you. That tuning fork comes out when you see something like this happen. So if
Mhm.
you are attuned to that, or you're attuned to that channel that you're trying to, like, you're trying to understand who you are and what you value, you have to believe that if you are sitting there having like a dinner that some people in America can't afford, and it's living in an area where some
Yep.
people can't afford it, that the moment that those tanks and those troops and the fascists roll up, that you are going to set aside that privilege or use that privilege and then walk outside and put yourself on the line. And that is the difference, I think. It's the difference between just enjoying life as authoritarianism takes over and ignoring it because you privilege that privilege versus, no, I'm willing to do something that is going to put my privilege on the line, and I'm going to be able to use what I have in order to help these people. And I think that moment of truth, that's where the tuning fork comes out. It's not just for yourself, it's for the community and it's for other people as well.
Yeah, I think that that is so right, and that's such a beautiful example, right? Because it is this kind of narrative that has been placed in our minds that, well, if it's not us, then like we can continue to move forward. And what we are seeing, because that's one of many examples of people in their towns, in their cities, in their spaces stepping up and saying no, right? And sometimes it works. And sometimes it doesn't. But the reality is that people are stepping up and saying, this is not the country that I want to live in, right? And it isn't, because I know that people, and I've been talking about, right, like the fuck around, and find out part, and like, oh, sitting on sitting up high on this horse and being like, well, we tried to warn you, as if like that is helpful, right? The I told you so of this moment is not actually helpful. It's now, what do you do with the information that is ever present in front of you? And I think that people are taking action and saying, you know what? No, like I don't want this. And unfortunately, sometimes you have to see, right, in your face, in your city, across the street from a restaurant, right down the street, like you have to see it and feel it in order to then be in tuned to your own moral compass. Because I think that, like, I don't know about you, but as I've been working on this project, I'm thinking about America, and I'm thinking about all of these stories of America. And I'm thinking about, some of them being true and a lot of them being, rose colored, a lot of them being lies, right? That made us feel good about ourselves. But the truth of America is around like our resilience, our collective resilience, our ability to like meet hard things and move past them, right? And I feel like there are times when you have to be met with really bad things in order to see how strong you are, in order to see like, you know, can we build in this moment, right? And that, every fitness person will tell you like, change doesn't happen from your place of comfort. And I think that for too long, Americans have been allowed to be comfortable living in this kind of comfortable oblivion. And unfortunately, we say like, oh, it shouldn't have to affect you personally. Yeah, the fuck it does. We're human. Like, in all honesty, it's too easy to swipe to a different, place, tune into a different station, find something else to distract ourselves, because that is human nature. And so I think that, unfortunately, the thing that I hold on to in this moment is that sometimes the worst does need to happen in order for the best to come next. Right? Like, and I hold that very deeply, because I believe that it's true. That like you can't change doesn't occur from our places of ease. It just doesn't. And if we can hold that, then maybe we can see again, try and find opportunities inside of the obstacles.
I mean, you just nailed it. And there's a couple of things I want to drill down on because like you couldn't be more right about so much of what you just said. First things first. I think for people who have seen this for years, and by the way, I don't think anybody is watching or listening to this who didn't see it with us, because
Right.
really what you and I and a very small handful of others have been talking about for years, it hasn't been popular because it's easy, right? Because like we didn't do this because there was a lot of money in it. We didn't like
Let's just be
know
honest.
we know where the
No.
money is. The money is in telling everyone that everything's going to be okay, because it's not a popular thing to say, hey, there are some real problems here and y'all are sort of papering over it. But what you just said about the I told you so aspect of it, there is an issue here, which is it's not enough to have simply seen this thing coming. Like that's self-aggrandizement. Like I
Mm.
don't think that there's anything to be gained from you and I sitting here patting ourselves on the back. Like it's just simply saying, this is something that we should have seen. We didn't see it. Now we have another opportunity to do something about it. Because if it's about that, that's actually, again, going back to a capitalist system, that's about making money, that's about building influence, that's about gaining clout. And what is that based on? The same insecurity that drives Republicans, Donald Trump, Elon Musk, and the rest of them. It's just bragging. That's all it is. Like,
Yeah.
I got that one right, so congratulate me. No, the next question is, what do you do now? And a lot of people are missing that, and they're going back to familiar sort of catharsis. And I've noticed so much over the past couple of weeks. I made an audio about this for dispatches. Like, people are going back to like a 2016, 2017 mindset, which
Mm.
is they're going to post through it, Danielle. They're going to figure out like what memes are going to make them feel better and what's going to sort of like unload the discomfort. The problem is that the discomfort is the most important part of this. We don't want to feel discomfort.
Yep.
We don't want to feel uncomfortable. It's a lot easier to like regress into delusion and denial and to not actually have to make changes that occur. And one thing that I will say, and I have to assume you've experienced this and a lot of people listening and watching have experienced, there's power in going through things that you have been terrified of and
Yes.
and things that hurt really really bad. So much of our lives, and by the way, America wants to pretend it's like this like very strong nation. It's the most anxious afraid nation that has probably ever existed on the face of the earth. Like, it is like sudden, and I speak as a person who dealt with anxiety like my entire life and still have to struggle through. Anxiety steals from us the energy that we need in order to make changes. It keeps us from working through the discomfort, and there's a strength that happens when you make it through one of the most frightening things that you ever imagined could possibly happen, because it builds strength, it builds resilience,
Yep.
it builds faith that you can do other things. So, right now, we're going through one of the most frightening things that we could ever imagine. We are in the middle of an authoritarian fascistic takeover. And like we saw it coming and we were afraid of it. And here we are. And guess what?
Yes.
We have to fight through it. And that crisis, it reveals character. It provides clarity. And so it doesn't mean that it's okay. It doesn't mean that it should be happening. It absolutely shouldn't. But we should be able to say, okay, here we are. This is things as they are. What do I want? Where do I want to go?
What do I want?
What do I want? What kind of a life and what kind of a world do I want to build? Because I now see a world I don't want. And guess what? It was coming this entire time. We lived in it and lived in it and lived in it, and we were in denial of it. Now there's no room for denial anymore. So now you have to get busy building the world that you want as opposed to dying with the world that never existed in the first place.
I keep going back to one of the, many of the famous quotes from Audre Lorde. The one that says, if I don't define myself for myself, then I get crushed into other people's fantasies of me and eaten alive. And I keep thinking about the ways in which white nationalism has always tried to define who we are, right, as a people. And I mean that collectively. One, who Black people are and should be, but also who white people are and should be, and have tried to formulate this world, right, that is devoid of reality, but also of responsibility. And that you can spend a lifetime fighting against and actually not building towards, right? And that is part of when Toni Morrison would say that racism is the distraction, right? Is that then all you're doing is enthralled in the things that they want you to be, as opposed to in building what it is that you want. And that's why I say it isn't delusional to see that there is great opportunity inside of the destruction that is happening now, right? That if you don't look at this moment and say, well, now I'm surrounded by all the things I don't want. Now I'm ingesting all of the things that I've never wanted to, right? What is it that I actually do want? Because what white nationalism and the delusion of white supremacy tries to tell us is that their power is inevitable,
That's right.
right? And that and what MAGA has said over and over again is that it is inevitable, and all that's left for us to do is comply, right, or be crushed. And I think that we have this opportunity that is extraordinary in this moment to decide we don't want their vision, right? So if we don't want their vision and a collection of us doesn't want their vision, then what vision do we want? Because we're told that equity and justice is a utopia. But the founders were told that a government for and by the people was impossible because it had never been done before.
Right.
So I'm like, all of these are formulations off of ideas and stories. So if it is, then what's the next one?
And that's our job. That's our job. That's what we're tasked with. Like, you may not want to do it, but you actually have to. We don't have a choice now. I think about that meme that everybody shares all the time. It's the dog sitting among the flaming house.
Yes, yes,
This,
yes, yes.
and I know what that stands for, but I also want people to take it to its logical extreme. How did that house catch on fire that the dog is saying this is fine? It's because it had faulty wiring and something wrong with the house. Once you put the fire out, you can't continue living in that house. It's been
Hmm.
destroyed. You have to create something else. And the problem here, it runs aground with something that we keep touching on, which I think is essential, which is most Americans don't know what they want. And the reason that they don't know
That
what
part.
the reason they don't know what they want is because they don't know who they are. They don't have a clue because they have allowed everyone around them, parents, religious communities, politics, culture, tell them what it is that they want. And they have had to sort of figure out, like unconsciously, how to work through systems that are oppressive.
Yep.
There's a reason why the family systems that lead to authoritarianism now scale out. And you have a lot of people, and how many times, Danielle, do you hear people who complain about families or communities and they're like, I don't want to be like that. And what do? They become like that.
Yep.
Even as they say that they don't want that. It's an unconscious thing that ends up happening, and these cycles repeat because the antidote to repeating cycles of trauma and oppression and pain is awareness and clarity of what those things are and who you
Hmm.
are outside of it. We're a codependent nation. We do not understand why we want to do the things we do. We don't understand why we buy the things we do, why we do the work we do, why we say the things that we say. And so all of these stories that are pressed upon us, they determine us. They keep
Yes.
from being able to imagine. There is this thing where the unfamiliar future is worse than the familiar hell. They would much rather continue going down the same road and feeling quote unquote comfortable because they don't have to feel that discomfort than they would in taking chances. This is one of the reasons why so many people are capitulating and collaborating with the fascists because they don't want to risk their power, their wealth, their influence, their status, or they don't want to start dealing with the story that they tell themselves about about their lives. And what happens? Authoritarians use that as a backdoor to control us and keep us working alongside of them, whether we're doing it consciously or unconsciously. You have to be able to look around and say, you know what, this isn't enough for me. And this doesn't work for
Hmm.
me. And you have to get busy understanding yourself outside of the things that have been put upon you. And that is not something that Americans want to deal with. They would much rather live in the stories that have been given to them, even if those stories are complete and utter horse shit, than they would sitting in the silence that you and I were talking about, finding that radio station, finding that tuning fork, and paying attention because sometimes what you hear isn't comfortable. And you have to get busy figuring out who you are as opposed to what everybody else tells you that you are.
And it's the busying of figuring out who you are and that not being tied to, Jared, what you do, right? Because that is also the lie of productivity and hypercapitalism that has had us tie our identity into what we can produce. And so then if I can produce more, I can buy more. And if I buy more, then I feel better. Right. And it's this constant cycle of just stuff. And you can look right now and see that no amount of stuff, for example, is going to fill the void, right? That is this gaping hole and wound about who we are,
Yep.
right? And I think that it's so incredibly important because again, I remember I started therapy maybe now 7 years ago. And when I went into therapy, it was like me talking about being on this hamster wheel, but talking about not wanting to be complacent, right? And that I equated this is how like mind fucked I was for the longest time, that I had equated comfort and ease with complacency. Because if I wasn't working and grinding and being and producing, then who was I and what value did I have? Right? And it wasn't until learning through therapy and kind of unraveling this story that I was told about myself as a Black woman, as a queer person, like that it wasn't just about acquiring all of the things that white supremacy told me I couldn't have,
That's right.
because that still wasn't going to make me feel whole, right? It was really about sitting and tuning into the station and saying, who are you? If all of these people, if all of these entities were to close their mouth, were to stop speaking and stop telling you who you should be and what you should be doing or what you can achieve or how much you can have or what, and that the doing for me was about the proving them wrong, then who am I without all of that noise? And that has been the biggest undertaking for myself over the last 7+ years of trying to really assess and decouple myself from production and really think about, again, the work that I do as an offering, right? But as also not necessarily the entirety of who I am. Do you have that? Have you
Oh,
had that?
oh yeah. And what we're beginning to touch on, and I think this is something that a lot of people shy away from, because we can talk about the psychology of authoritarianism all day long. We can talk about these absolutely like lost individuals who make their problems our problems. But what you just started touching on is the absolute core of why white people in America, and particularly white liberals who are anti fascist, are not actually doing the work. And one of the things that we have to touch on, you brought up therapy. It's very important to bring this up. I think everybody should be in therapy. I think it's everybody should have a place where they go and deal with this stuff. So much of therapy in this country, if you don't go to the right therapist, if you don't seek the right type of treatment and discussion,
Yep.
what are you actually having a conversation about? You're trying to ease the discomfort of living with privilege. You're trying to be a better worker. You're going because you don't want
Mhm.
to interrupt your job. You don't want to mess up the life that you have. You don't want to mess up the things that you have. And it breeds complacency. It basically tells you that, like, the only problem that you have right now is maybe that you're calling out at work, or maybe
Mhm.
not happy with your career. And what's actually underneath all of that is something that gets ignored all the time, which is if you're actually looking at yourself and working on yourself, you have to ask questions such as, what is it that I actually want? Not how am I going to be a productive cog in the machine, which
Yep.
authoritarianism comes out. What does it tell you, Danielle? Don't say a lot. Like,
Yep.
take care of yourself, make sure that you keep your career, make sure that you don't rock the boat too much. And that keeps you from solidarity. It keeps you from building coalitions and fighting against this thing. What am I going to do? Go out and get shot by ICE? What am I going to
Mm.
do? Am I going to risk losing my job because I say that like all of this corporate capitulation is wrong? Like, no, what we actually need to do is start to deconstruct the stories about ourselves and the trauma that we have endured under capitalism and growing authoritarianism. That's the essence of this thing. And going back to what we talk about frequently, it's uncomfortable. It's
Yep.
really scary. Like the idea of leaving a career that you put all this time and money and effort into and also disappointing people. And here's the scariest thing. When I stepped away from academia, I was there for 17 years and like, went to undergrad,
Mm.
got tenure, all that stuff. You know what one of the most frightening aspects about it was? It wasn't the money. You know what it was? I didn't know who I was. I only knew who I was based on the job that I had. If I'm
Yep.
a professor, who am I? And I'm not going to sit here and lie and tell you when people would say, "What do you do?" And I would say, "I'm a professor." There's pride there.
Yep.
Bec What does that say? I'm someone who's smart and capable and respected. And deep, deep down, we were just talking about congratulating ourselves or whatever we do. What's underneath that? It's not the job, it's a deep wound. It's the wound that I'm not capable, that I'm not good, that there's something wrong with me. And if I just keep layering career accolades on top of it, if I keep like taking successes, which are hollow for the most part, if I layer that on, nobody will notice deep down there's a child in there who doesn't feel good enough. And that is the discomfort that you have to go through in order to understand who you are. And going back to the thesis of today, what it is that you want. I
Yeah.
didn't necessarily want all of that. I knew I was supposed to want it. I knew that that was what culture and capitalism would reward. I had to figure out who I was outside of the track that I was on. And a lot of white people in America, and especially a lot of white middle class liberals in America, would much rather go along to get along in order to not have to deal with that shit and not think about who they are, particularly in a moment of crisis. So, what do, Danielle? They turn it off.
Yep.
Or maybe they give a little bit of money to a political candidate and they're like, well, my job is done here. But what are you doing? You're paying to make the problem go away. You're not actually doing the hard work in yourself and in your community and in the culture at large. And as a result, you still are a cog in that larger wheel.
And as another result of that, then when somebody enters the chat and tells you that you don't need to think, that I can just make your life better, that I alone can fix this, that you don't have to trouble yourself with learning new skills or how the world is changing around you, that I can bend things to your will, then guess what becomes so attractive rather than dealing with the hardness of who you are?
That's right.
The used car salesman,
Mhm.
right? And that to me is like, you know, one of the things that constantly comes up all the time, right? When people are talking about America and when we're faced with an ugly piece, right? An ugly piece that's true that we can't deny away. We say that's not who we are. Oh, that's not who we are, right? And
Yeah.
it's one of the phrases that allows us to hold on to this inherent innocence and goodness about us as Americans, because that's not who we are. It absolutely is who we are.
And who
We
we've always
are
been.
all things, right? We are both good and bad, hold both light and darkness. But if you are afraid of the dark, right? Then you're always going to think, well, anything that will cast a shadow, I must avoid, right? And I'm just like, you can't appreciate light without dark,
That's right.
right? So for me, it's like I'm not a parent, but one of the things that I notice all the time is parents consistently saying that they never want their children to get hurt, right? That like I'm trying to have them hold on to their innocence for as long as possible. Why? The world is painful. And what you should be teaching them is resilience. Not that nothing bad is ever going to happen, right? But that the fact is that bad things do happen, but you're going to be able to move through it, right? Like you fall down on your bike and you scrape your knee, and guess what? Right? You got up again. You didn't decide that you weren't going to ride your bike anymore because you have the possibility of falling down. So I think that people really need to be thinking about like their own resilience and then how they do or don't teach that, right? Whether you're a parent or not, but it's just like how are we defining ourselves not through like this lie of our innocence, but through the truth of our resilience?
Exactly right. And resilience, by the way, is like one of the most misused concepts in all of culture. Like I talk about this all the time. It's like whenever there's like a tragedy, like a mass shooting or a disaster, we talk about how strong a community is so that we don't have to help them. Right? Like,
Yes.
we don't have to, like, give them aid or, like, have actual assistance there because we have a mythology of that. And from a personal standpoint, I'll just go ahead and give a little bit of background. I grew up in an incredibly dysfunctional childhood. And, like, what did that do? It gave me a choice, Danielle. It gave me a choice, which was for many years of my life, I had a chip on my shoulder. Look what happened to me, right? Look what I endured. And as a result, that could have either metastasized into a victimhood complex that I made everybody else's problem. And I did for a while. Do not get me wrong. I was an angry young man who made it other people's problems. Or I can say, you know what? What I went through is an example of what people shouldn't go through. It's an example of like, oh, I need to somehow or another figure out how to process what happened to me so that I can try and prevent it from happening to other people. And there is a coddling in the United States of America. And I don't mean that like the New York Times, and I don't mean that like the Republican Party or all these like third way Democrats. I'm not saying the kids aren't all right or they're being coddled. I'm saying that there is a resistance in the United States of America to the idea that sometimes things are not going to work the way that we want them to work.
Right.
Sometimes we're not going to be able to buy our way out of discomfort. Sometimes, and what are people doing? They're retreating from mass chaos by moving to gated communities,
Yep.
by paying for security, by paying a
Yep.
little extra at the airport in order to not have to deal with the absolute dehumanization of what happens when you're in the back of the plane,
Yep.
right? So as that takes place, capitalism tells us make a little bit more, work a little bit harder, you'll be able to buy your way out of the worst aspects of this, right? Like the wealthy, their kids are not going to go without an education. The wealthy's kids are not going to go without their vaccinations. The wealthy kids are not going to do without like higher education and these opportunities. The rest of us are being put into a battle royale in which we are competing for what scraps are left so that we can make sure that our children aren't going to do without. And so, what does it keep us from doing? It keeps us from recognizing the fate of this person over here who would be left behind, disappeared, or murdered, that their fate is not linked to my fate. And as long as I can get to the end of this rat race that we're talking about with my power, with my privilege, with my wealth intact, well, everything's gravy
Yep.
because everybody else is expendable except for me. And this authoritarian takeover, and I always want to make sure to say this, and people are not comfortable with this. Danielle, this has been going on for the entirety of our lives.
Yep.
Just so happens that the alert right now, this clarity, this crisis, is that it's not as easy to escape anymore. It's happening in our
Yep.
neighborhoods, it's happening down the block. And that doesn't mean that it's not real. It means that it's always been happening and the conditions are worsening. So, this is the moment where we can have clarity and say, I don't want this anymore. I want something different. It's not let me make more so I can escape it, or don't let this happen in my neighborhood. It's that in the neighborhood that you're not in, which is, like where marginalized communities are, or around the world where people are starving, being murdered. That's my problem too. And I've been able to avoid it for too long because of the privilege that comes along with being an American and whatever class, and all that stuff. Like it's realizing this has been a problem that is a long time coming. And now people are starting to recognize it.
I mean, I love this so much, everything that you just broke down, because the fact is that we have been told, and this is why we celebrate the wealthy so much,
Right.
because the desire is to have so much money that I don't have to care anymore, that I don't have to deal with any of the things that are happening outside of my front door because I've put a gate there now. Right.
Right.
And then the gate, and I've been able to create even more space between me and the perceived other. And I think that the reality is, and this is the truth, is that, you can still go on a vacation right now, right? You may have difficulty getting back into the country depending on who you are, right? And what have you, and what airport you're flying to. But once all of these false layers of protection that capitalism have afforded us are gone, are stripped away, then it's like, oh, I didn't realize that this was all going on, right? Because you didn't have to.
That's
And
right.
that has been America. Wars are things that happen in other places. Famine is things that happen in other places. Pandemics are things that happen in other places, right? They're not things that happen here. And so we can then again move into this false narrative of, well, these things just don't happen to us. Or these things only happen to bad people. They live, why do, they live in these bad places? And it's like, because we've told ourselves that we are inherently good. And I think that that's the mirror that Donald Trump is holding up to us for us to realize too, is that, you know what? Two sides of the same coin. This country voted twice for Barack Obama and it voted twice for Donald Trump, right? So one person was offering you, oh, yes, we can. And the other one is saying, I am your retribution, right? We are both, right? And so it's this idea of saying, like, now that you're presented with the reality, right? Who do you want to be? Right? Like, how do you want to move forward? Because neither of them are inevitable without a degree of work. So I feel like right now there are so many people that are waking up from the illusion in a way that you and I have been challenging ourselves over the past, decade plus of like, how do I want to be? What do I want to offer? Who am I on this spinning rock? Right? Like, and our time is not a given, right? Like it is, we're actually our life expectancy is rolling backwards. So we have a limited amount of time. What do we want to do with it? If it isn't just about us and me and what I can consume and what I can take.
I think one of the most important lines that has been written in the past few decades in terms of art was in Get Out. It was the line, I would have voted for him a third time for Barack Obama, which was this moment. And I think that the whiplash going from Barack Obama to Donald Trump, it revealed something. This whole idea of that's not who we are. A lot of the quote unquote progress that has taken place over the past few decades has been a veneer. It's aspiration. And it's everything that you see from entertainments, which, by the way, were all put out by corporations that immediately when Trump came around, they're like, DEI, what are you talking about? What? Wait, we were never for that. And you see like all these franchises that like tried to diversify. They didn't do that because they cared about diversity. They did that because they wanted to expand their market reach.
Come
They
on.
they already got all the white dudes at the movie theaters, so they were trying to get everybody else. They didn't actually care about progressing society. And the problem that most people are having right now and trying to wrap their heads around what's going on is that mythology that you just brought up, which is that we're not like that. I've got bad news for people, and I don't know if you've heard this before. The founders were slave owners. And not only were they slave owners, they created a government that was explicitly designed to not allow democracy to work. And now it just so happens that the people who are in charge believe in that. They believe in the idea that white men, particularly white wealthy men, should be in charge of everything. And if you
Mm-hmm.
go back and look at all their documents and all the things that they've ever said, they believe in a natural hierarchy. The
Yep.
rest of us have been lulled by a mythology that feels good. Look at America. It feels so much better. I'm watching something on my television right now that reflects to me the world that I think that I want. But guess what? If your principles are such that you're not willing to put things on the line, you're not willing to risk your comfort, you're not willing to risk your wealth and your privilege, they're not principles.
Come on.
They're baubles. They're something that represents something about yourself that isn't true. So if your response to a rising authoritarian world is to say, hey, I think gay and trans people should be quiet. Yeah, I think what's going on in Gaza is disgusting, but I'm not going to say anything about it because I want to win this election. I think this over here, people of color, well, I think maybe they shouldn't be as radical. This CRT stuff is a little too much. What you're actually revealing is that your principles are never real.
Come
They were
on.
curtain dressing. And so people want to live in that fantasy. They want to live in that mythology because in order to step out of it, going back to the theme of the day, it's uncomfortable because you are risking not just the comfort and privilege and wealth, you're risking the person that you think you are. And guess what? Other bad news, that person that you think you are is not the real you. It's a character that you've been taught to play and that you've been forced into, not just by parents and communities, but also the culture and capitalism at large. And so, in order to be a revolutionary and in order to make something that is revolutionary, you have to burn that down. You
Mm.
tear it down to the studs and figure out what's underneath there. Because you have to figure out who you are in order to figure out what it is that you're willing to risk for something different. And otherwise, it's just performance.
I mean, I wish I could jump through the screen and hug you because
No, what the
everything, everything is so on point. And I'm sitting here and I'm thinking about those that are in power, right? That have created all these things that we say are geniuses are all designed to distract us from figuring out who we actually are. Right? Like every single thing, even the device that we're on right now, our phones, right? The creation of the smartphone was actually to just distract us from the world around us. You see people walking down the street with their heads down and hunched over, right? And it's like because the world just became too much. So let's just stream our way out of it. Let's just buy our way out of it. And the thing is, we can't run anymore. We can't run anymore. Everything that we've been trying to avoid is literally right in front of us now. Or I would better say it's right on top of us,
right.
right? And so it is, people say like, what can I do? What can I give to blah, blah, blah? What can you do? You can learn who you are, right? And what you've been avoiding, right? Because if we were to really engage in that project, right, of deep reflection individually and that as a nation, do you know what we could do? Where we could go? What we could create? I mean, we have got to recognize and this is the thing, like we're having this conversation at a time when the project of erasure is like on steroids. And the reason you have to ask yourself, why are they scrubbing ships and burning books and, and taking down statues and all of these things? Because if you can see it, you can achieve it. And I only want you to believe that I get to define who you are, right? And what you can do. And so if you don't know who you are, then you wait on other people to tell you who you are. Right? And so I'm like, and this is why I say, I saw a post a while back in the chat. It said, stop talking bad about white people. And I'm like, you're in the wrong place. Or maybe you're in the right place because the reality is that it's not to be told the truth, right? And to hold up a mirror to yourself is to take a hard look. That's not someone talking bad about you. Right? Like you need to be able to take the truth, the good and the bad. And all that white Americans have been fed is this fantasy of who they are in the world. So much so now that we got to erase every bit of truth over the last 60 years to preserve that lie.
Yeah, and I got bad news for anybody who's going down that road. Whiteness is fake. It's a construct that was created in order to divide us and in order to decide in groups and out groups. There's a reason why it's malleable. There's a reason, by the way, that immigrants were not considered white until they were needed to be white in
Come
order
on,
to
the numbers.
in order to hurt people. The entire point of this is that it's a fantasy. That idea of like Aryan people or whatever, that was never real. It was made up. And Danielle, not only was it made up, it was made up under the most like bullshit circumstances. What did the Nazis do? They were like, the Atlantis. Right? They literally took it all back to completely fictional bullshit. And if you look at it and you're not a part of it, you're like, wait, this is all made up. The same way that the idea that we're living in a golden age, we all know that's not real. But
Right.
what? It's more comfortable to play pretend than it is to look at reality. What MAGA offers is freedom of unfreedom. They will get rid of literally everything that makes you uncomfortable. That's the entire point of it. They don't offer anything materially except for the wealth and oligarchical classes. For everybody else, it's a fantasy that they can live in. It's enabling. And not just as enabling, it's an invitation to live in another world that doesn't exist, that never existed. And by the way, you get to play whatever fantasy you want. There's a reason why the people who participate in this are all playing dress up, Danielle.
Mm-hmm.
Why these like very very soft brittle people are like cosplaying as if they're like stormtroopers. There's a reason why all of the people are getting their cosmetic surgeries and like living this like, I mean, the Christy Gnome thing is like one of the most instructive things that we've ever seen. They're playing pretend. And the reason they're playing pretend is because it's a whole lot easier to play pretend and let a dictator and authoritarian movement do what it wants to do than it is to be an adult, grow up, sit with discomfort, and make choices. And
Yep.
that's a larger issue here. We have choices to make right now. We have so many existential crises. Our economy is hanging on by a thread and it doesn't work anymore. Global climate change is growing and we're going to have to do something about it, or God knows what's going to happen. On top of that, growing authoritarianism around the world is going to plunge us into a nightmare future and possibly a World War III that could end society as we know it. We have things like technology, which you brought up, which it's not just what we have, it's what we're building, which is going to destroy so much of what has existed. We have to make choices. And choices are hard because
Yep.
you have to make value judgments. You have to decide what it is that you actually care about. It's a whole lot easier to just let mom and dad take care of it, and you can go on living whatever comfortable fantasy it is that like keeps you intact. That's the problem. The question now is whether we grow up or whether we remain children. And we have millions upon millions of Americans, and not just in MAGA for the record, who want to remain children. And that's what America is about. It's about having the privilege to be a child. And now the question is, who gets to retain that privilege of being a child and not having to take responsibility for yourself?
Yeah, I mean, this is to me, at the essence of the war on wokeness, right? At the war on consciousness. Because, like, when you're conscious, like, you then begin to see things differently. You begin to ask critical questions. You begin to unpack things, and then you're not so easily lied to, right? And it forces you to grow up, right? And we have to decide, this is not never land, right? And it's what we've allowed ourselves to create and live in. Again, if I just have enough money, then I never have to pay attention to anything around me, right? And if I pretend that I'm not racist because I voted for the black man twice, but I harbor racist resentment so easily swayed to a place where I can say, maybe don't speak too much. Maybe if they just followed the directions of the cops, they wouldn't be shot. Maybe if trans people would just be like everybody else, then all would be okay. Like, we have got to reckon with ourselves, right? We have got to reckon with ourselves and the lies that we've told ourselves that have allowed us to continue, right? America is a project and we got to change, right? The parameters of what success of what this project, the outcome of it is. Because it isn't this kumbaya place. There are so many wounds that are here, right? That, like you've said, we've just been papering over, and now we're falling through the paper.
Yeah, and there's not enough paper in the world to paper over this anymore. Like, we have reached the consequences of our actions. I mean, that's just what it is. There's no it's like living in constant debt and then eventually the notice gets there. You know what I mean? You can't
Hmm.
not looking at the notices because eventually someone's going to knock on the door. And they're knocking on the door now. That's the problem. And we're either going to keep being delusional and go over the cliff, or we're going to wake up and take responsibility. Those are the choices. And I'm sorry about that. I wish that I had something better to say that's more comforting, but you need to be uncomfortable right now. You need to take
Yes.
care of yourself and you need to be healthy, but at the same time, you have to maintain a level of discomfort because this is an uncomfortable situation.
Oh, my friend, I'm telling you, every week
Every week.
Every week, I look forward to these conversations. Every week, I feel like we get a little deeper into the problem because it isn't just the problem. We can't tell ourselves it's just MAGA, it's just Donald Trump, it's just Trumpism. That too is the veneer.
Don't Aren't you happy that we're not just like, who are the 2028 candidates who are going to break through? Like, my God, how shallow does that feel now? Do you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
talking, well, will the Democrats be able to hold the line and not, get the votes that they like? My God, no, it's actually much deeper than that. And I'm so glad that we have this opportunity to like actually get into the real stuff here.
I appreciate you. I appreciate all of the people that show up each week that we get into these conversations. And, what's funny is that I still, I have the other 2028 bullshit conversations, but now I post them in a different way. I answer them in a different way when I'm asked. Like, don't talk to me about 2028. Talk to me about right now. Talk to me about how we're feeling. Talk to me about what is going on. You know, as opposed to like this idea that we're going to vote ourselves out of this moment, that we're going to buy ourselves out of this moment. We're not. So I'm just so grateful for you every single week that we decided to do this.
I am so grateful for you, and I'm so grateful for the people who are tuning in and doing the work. Again, it feels so good hearing about people who are having their own conversations and that this is resonating with because it quite frankly, it's just there's something replenishing about having actual conversations about what's going on as opposed to just parroting back and forth what's given to us by the wealth class and the political classes. Because when it comes down to it, we're talking about very human things.
Yeah.
And we forget because it's an artifice. But I couldn't appreciate you more. Thank you so much.
All right, friends. Well, we will be back next week, 12 p.m. Eastern, Wednesday. Grateful for you. And we'll see you soon. And I'll see you soon,
Yeah.
Jared.
Be good.